Ancient Greek slaves. They were the invisible foundation of one of history's most celebrated civilizations. They built, harvested, cooked, and cleaned, all while remaining almost absent from the shining stories of democracy, philosophy, and art. But what did these men, women, and children actually eat to fuel their endless labor? Were they starved into submission, or did their meals resemble those of poor but free Greeks? Did their diets change depending on their work, or perhaps even their owner's wealth? These are questions historians continue to investigate, and the answers reveal both surprising hardships and unexpected nuances in daily ancient life. To understand the diets of slaves in Greece, it is important to know who they were. Slavery stretched across the Greek world from at least the 6th century BC to the rise of Rome in the 2nd century BC. Slaves were made up of prisoners of war, people sold through trade networks, and individuals born into slavery. They worked in homes, fields, workshops, and on massive construction projects. While the wealthiest Athenians might own dozens or even hundreds of slaves, poorer families sometimes kept only one. The role of a slave determined not just the kind of work they performed, but also what scraps of sustenance they were given or denied. The mainstay of the ancient Greek diet was grains, and this was true for slaves as well. Barley, cheaper than wheat, formed the bulk of their meals. Barley was typically ground into flour to make a dense bread or boiled into a porridge. Ancient sources mention barley cakes being supplied to slaves, as they were inexpensive to produce in large quantities. Wheat bread was more desirable and eaten by wealthier citizens, but it was not entirely absent from slaves' diets. Some evidence suggests that slaves in wealthier households received some wheat products too, though usually in smaller amounts. Either way, barley and grain-based foods remained constant, forming the backbone of their daily nutrition. Vegetables and legumes played a critical role in supplementing the simple grain-based meals of slaves. Lentils, chickpeas, and beans were often boiled into stews that could serve large groups at low cost. Vegetables like onions, garlic, and cabbages were inexpensive and abundant, so they likely appeared regularly in slave rations. These foods were not luxurious, but they were filling, and they provided essential protein for workers who lived under constant physical strain. Archaeological remains and literary references consistently point to the importance of legumes in sustaining the poorer layers of society, a group that included slaves. One of the central questions historians debate is how often slaves ate meat or fish. For elite citizens, meat was primarily tied to religious festivals, sacrifices, or communal feasts, not everyday meals. Slaves occasionally benefited from these moments, eating leftover portions distributed after ceremonies. Fish, especially salt-preserved varieties like sardines or anchovies, was cheaper and more widely available than fresh cuts of meat, and there is evidence to suggest slaves consumed it more regularly than meat. Still, access to animal protein was inconsistent. Domestic slaves in wealthy homes could sometimes sneak or be given small amounts, while agricultural slaves in the countryside might have gone months without any at all. Not all slaves in ancient Greece shared the same diet. Household slaves, who cooked, cleaned, and served meals, sometimes ate better than those who worked outdoors. They often consumed leftovers from their masters' kitchens, giving them occasional access to higher quality bread, cheese, or olives. Agricultural slaves, on the other hand, survived on the most basic rations of barley, beans, and water, meant to sustain them but never to indulge them. Their physical labor was more brutal, yet their meals remained harsher. These differences underscore how food both reflected and reinforced the roles slaves were assigned in society. The consumption of wine was deeply ingrained in ancient Greek culture, and slaves were not exempt. Slave rations often included a diluted form of wine mixed with water, known as oinos. It was not merely a luxury but a safer alternative to drinking untreated water. Strong, undiluted wine was reserved for citizens, but watered-down versions were common among the poor and enslaved. They likely consumed it alongside their grain meals, both as hydration and as a mild preservative against illness. Historical texts indicate that even field slaves were sometimes allotted small amounts of such diluted wine, as it was practical and inexpensive compared to other drinks. Though not abundant in slave diets, olive oil still appeared in small quantities. For wealthier households, oil was central to cooking, seasoning, and ritual. Slaves might have received olive oil mixed into porridge or drizzled lightly over bread. In larger estates, where olives were harvested as cash crops, some oil may have gone into slave rations. However, their intake would have been modest, as oil was too valuable to distribute generously. Other fats, such as lard or animal drippings, were likely more accessible alternatives for rural slaves, particularly when meat was slaughtered in rare but communal occasions. Though basic rations dominated, occasional treats found their way into slave diets. In some cases, wealthy households gave leftovers like figs, nuts, or cheese to their attendants. These were small indulgences, but they revealed the proximity of some slaves to higher status foods. Meanwhile, across different Greek regions and city-states, availability varied. In Sparta, for instance, the notorious black broth, made from pork, blood, vinegar, and salt, was a stark staple for ordinary citizens, and slaves, the helots, likely ate versions of this dish as well. Local agriculture dictated diet as much as status did, meaning that one slave's table did not always look like another's. Much of what we know about slave diets comes not from direct records written by slaves, but from household accounts, comedic plays, and archaeological remains. Ancient texts rarely devoted space to describing the lives of the enslaved, but scattered clues exist. Writers like Xenophon and Aristophanes offered hints, whether through casual mention or social satire. Archaeological studies of kitchens, cooking tools, and food remnants such as charred seeds or animal bones all add to the picture. Today, experts combine literary references with scientific studies to reconstruct a plausible understanding of what Greek slaves ate, painting a picture that is still incomplete but increasingly clear. Examining the diets of slaves becomes even more telling when compared to those of free but poor citizens. Free citizens, though limited in wealth, often had more regular access to wheat bread, olives, and better cuts of fish. Slaves, while surviving on similar staples, ate lower quality and less varied versions of the same foods. Yet the overlap was significant, since both groups lived within a subsistence economy where luxury was rare. What set them apart was choice. Free citizens, however limited, could choose what they ate, while slaves had virtually no say at all. The story of what slaves ate in ancient Greece is not one of luxury, but survival. Their meals were utilitarian, built around the cheapest staples of barley, legumes, vegetables, and diluted wine. Occasional opportunities added meat, olive oil, or household leftovers, but these were exceptions to a monotonous routine. What emerges from these details is a reminder that the celebrated achievements of Greek culture depended upon the basic nourishment of an unseen labor force. The humble slave diet, though rarely remembered, sustained the very hands that built temples, harvested crops, and kept households running in the world of ancient Greece.